There is no denying that the most recent addition to the Star Trek universe, Discovery, has been extremely controversial within the Trek fanbase. Ever since Discovery aired its first episode, Trekkies have been embroiled in a bitter debate about if Discovery represents the absolute best or the absolute worst of what Star Trek can be. I mean, a quick YouTube search will yield dozens of videos decrying Discovery as the end of Trek. Yet a search of Google brings up numerous articles calling Discovery's first season the best first season Trek has ever had. This is compounded even more with a look at Rotten Tomatoes, showing the vast difference in opinion between critics and fans. And if you dig even further into audience reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, you'll see basically only 5-star reviews calling Discovery sheer perfection, and 1-star reviews saying it's absolute trash. And this extreme polarization within the fanbase has left little room for opinions that land in the middle of the debate. Now, I am someone who absolutely adores Star Trek Discovery. I love the cinematic look, its characters, and the themes it tried to tackle to varying degrees of success in its first season. And I'm extremely excited by the promise that Season 2 has shown so far. And I by no means believe it's a perfect show. And it certainly hasn't reached the greatness that I know Trek can have, yet it has that potential. But by no means do I believe that it's a dumpster fire of a show that other Trekkies would argue it is. But despite my disagreement with those opinions, I think it's important to acknowledge that the hate for Discovery, as well as the love for it, and the conversation that it creates about what Star Trek means, are incredibly important to the future of the franchise. How so? It's because healthy debate yields more nuanced understanding of certain topics. By having more than one voice in a conversation, we are able to create a unique synthesis of ideas that is stronger than the two opposing sides. It's why, at least in principle, the American political system is fashioned in such a way to encourage discourse and conversation. Practice may not always yield that result, but America is a nation of ideals, and so too is the Trek universe. This idea of encouraging healthy debate has been central to Trek since its inception. The characters of Spock and McCoy were often played at odds with each other, bringing opposing viewpoints on how to proceed in a situation into the forefront. They were typically framed as arguments between cold logic and emotional viewpoints, but not always. And it was Captain Kirk who many times represented the synthesis of these two sides of the debate. Oftentimes, McCoy would go too far into emotion or sometimes even outright racism, while Spock would sometimes be too cold and calculating and forget the human emotional element. He would listen to both Bones and Spock, ultimately finding a solution that worked better than what either had proposed. And this encouragement of debate is still central to Trek today. Discovery's showrunner and the head of the Star Trek franchise and controversial figure to many, Alex Kurtzman, agrees.
It took me a while to understand that the debate, that some people who love it and some people who hate it, is actually one of the great gifts of Star Trek. That if you try and please everybody, you're going to please nobody. And that debate is healthy and democratic and wonderful.
Debate about what Star Trek means isn't actually new. It's happened after each new addition to the franchise. Star Trek the Motion Picture asked us if Star Trek could work as movies, as well as tested our patience for how long visual effects could work on a screen. The Next Generation asked us to question if Trek could continue without Kirk or Spock. Deep Space Nine asked us to question if Trek could focus on a mostly singular location and darker stories, and yet still have an optimistic outlook on the world. Voyager asked us to look at issues of gender that Trek had never tackled before. Enterprise asked us about how prequels should use canon stories. And the J.J. Abrams movies asked us if a recast version of the Enterprise crew and a faster pace could still work in Trek. These changes brought us these questions and many more. And some attempts were successful and some weren't. Look at something like The Final Frontier or Insurrection for examples. Yet each time, Trek survived fan debate and continued to flourish in new and unexpected ways, as evidenced by the very fact that we're having these debates at all. So clearly, having people who both love and hate Discovery continue to talk to each other is an important part to creating a better Star Trek franchise. Yet today, it feels like that ability to foster healthy debate has broken down. Within the Trek fanbase, both sides don't seem to be listening to each other at all. Instead, we have continued to fall into our bubbles, only talking with people who agree with us and seeing the other side as fools. Our polarized discourse has caused us to reinforce our own beliefs, instead of constantly examining our own principles as Trek showed us to do. And as a result, It's allowed the fan base to become extremely vitriolic. Issues of gatekeeping have become rampant within our beloved community. Look at any YouTube comment section about Star Trek Discovery, and you'll find people accusing others of not being true Trek fans, whatever that actually means. I've seen Star Trek Discovery haters call fans of the show and myself idiots, mentally ill, or liars about their fandom. And I'm sure the opposite is true for people who love Star Trek Discovery, saying people who love shows like The Orville as being idiots or dumb as well. And as a Trekkie, I will not accept that. Gatekeeping is antithetical to what Trek means. Telling someone that they don't understand true Trek just because they like one show over the other or dislike it is exactly the opposite of Trek's message of inclusion and respect of diverse opinions. If anyone doesn't understand the message of Trek, I think it's someone who misses the mark about actually representing its ideals in everyday life. I don't care if you're someone like me who has seen every episode and movie of every iteration of Star Trek, read over 200 books and the comics, has a Star Trek tattoo, has met William Shatner, and has a home literally covered in way too much Star Trek paraphernalia that your girlfriend actively wonders if you're not mildly insane? Or if you're someone who has literally only seen that one episode of Star Trek Voyager that most of us regard as the worst Trek episode ever. You know the one. If you like Star Trek in any capacity, you're a fan, and you have a right to enter our community and have an opinion. And I welcome you with open arms, as any good citizen of the Federation would, no matter if I disagree with you or not. I respect you, even if I don't agree with your opinion. And this is something I feel very, very strongly about. We should all want to welcome as many people into the Trek fandom as possible. I spent too many times alone and made fun of for my love of Trek as a child for me to ever feel that it's okay to tell people that they can't like Trek in any way that they want to. I'm honestly just happy to share my love and community, even if we don't always agree. Yet this environment of gatekeeping and politicized bubbles have enabled an environment in which the worst elements of humanity have been allowed to flourish. Because we seek to find voices that reinforce our own, we start to uplift voices because they agree with us, even when they begin to showcase unacceptable viewpoints. And racist videos like this?
We got an Asian woman as captain. We got a black woman as first officer. We have like 2 white people. I have a problem with the fact that she doesn't speak fucking English. It is I, Captain Hong Tao Ming,
are held up as worthwhile voices in our fandom because they simply reinforce the idea that Discovery is bad. And I want to be very clear here. I happily accept those of you who hate Discovery as still being part of Trek fandom, as you should accept me as someone who loves Discovery as part of your fandom as well. We're all Trek fans, no matter what part of it that we like. But racist, misogynistic, homophobic, and other similar attitudes are unacceptable within the Star Trek community. And this drawing of a line of acceptability is also something ingrained in Star Trek. While creating healthy debate was always encouraged, captains like Kirk and Picard knew when the line of acceptability had been crossed.
Data is not human. He is different.
Yes, but that does not make him expendable or any less significant. No being is so important that he can usurp the rights of another.
I am not saying that haters of Discovery are all racist or misogynistic. What I am saying is that we all need to fight back against those who are, regardless of whether they agree or disagree with our main conceit. And if we are able to move beyond the vitriol and the problematic voices that have defined the conversation so far, we can find that by putting both sides' arguments into dialogue with each other, we can find something that perhaps illuminates a greater understanding of what makes good Star Trek. While there are many different points of view, the debate usually centers around 6 points when it comes to Discovery: serialization, canon, darker tone, quality of writing, and focus off the typical bridge crew characters, and the seeming politicization of the writing. Now, I'm not going to delve into each and every one of these points, as some of them, such as the politicization of the writing, I'm going to save for individual videos. But let's briefly take a look at seeing how both sides of the argument can yield interesting revelations. With the canon argument, despite the writers arguing that Discovery takes place within the same history as previous Trek shows, the Prime Timeline, critics of Discovery are angry at what they perceive to be breaks in canon. The look of the Klingons have changed, Trek icon Spock was given a never-spoken-of-before adoptive sister, the show featured holodeck-like technology that wouldn't be introduced until 100 years later according to canon, and a myriad of other changes. These critics argue that if Discovery wanted to have a more updated look, they should have set it further in the future, instead of as a prequel. Discovery fans argue that Discovery was hardly the first show to change Trek's look, such as previous Klingon designs or the addition of an Enterprise before Kirk's having come up in previous iterations of Star Trek. They argue that the updated look is necessary to keep up with television standards today, and actually introduces new and interesting stories. Yet there is validity to both arguments. The look of the show should be updated with the times in order to keep it relevant. But what is the point of setting a show as a prequel without actually using the prequel setting in interesting ways? For all of its successes and faults, Discovery's first season could have, with a few tweaks, taken place further in the future and barely have changed at all. It still could have explored similar issues and themes. Additions like Burnham being Spock's sister felt like they were only there to add a sense of legitimacy to the show as a Trek show. Look, we have a reference to Spock, so of course this is Star Trek. Both Star Trek Enterprise and the J.J. Abrams reboot grappled with these same issues. Enterprise seemed to struggle with its first 2 or 3 seasons, wanting to both update its stories but being too limited by its prequel setting to be terribly interesting. It finally found its perfect groove in season 4, by actually embracing its limitations yet unique setting to tell stories that were actually setting up future Trek events. And fans loved it. Outside of the finale. The J.J. Abrams movies went the complete opposite route, getting rid of canon by creating a new universe, in order to give themselves a brand new playground to play in. Yet this worked for fans because it was another universe, so the rules of canon were allowed to be broken. Looking at Discovery, they're trying to have a middle ground, especially in season 1. They updated the feel, yet didn't accept the limitations or the storytelling possibilities. Yet I would argue that the showrunners have actually taken fans' criticism, as season 2 seems to be a step in the right direction, as the show has seemingly set out to explore its connection to its prequel setting by looking at Burnham's relationship to Spock as a worthwhile storytelling avenue, instead of just a gambit at canon legitimacy and connection. Some still argue that it still refuses to accept its limitations as a prequel though, in terms of using things like holograms or holodecks. But it's clear that by having the conversation, instead of just saying, Discovery is perfect because it looks new, or Discovery is crap because it ignores canon, actually enables Discovery to improve. The same goes for issues like Discovery's darker tone, which some liked in season 1 and others despised. Season 2 seems to be bringing with it a brighter tone as a baseline, yet with the flexibility to boldly go to darker places than any Trek show has before. This seems to be a beautiful synthesis of the two sides of the argument, though only time will tell. As we can see, creating a worthwhile conversation can have important and tangible results on Discovery and Trek in general, but it wouldn't happen if we didn't actually talk to each other. Now, I'm not going to say that these views that I put down here are and should be the end result of the conversation between fans and haters of Discovery, but I show them to explain that by understanding both sides and creating constructive conversations that aren't intended to belittle or demean someone else's opinion actually yield worthwhile and more meaningful results. So many fandoms, from Star Wars to Doctor Who to Marvel Comics, are all currently embroiled in a heated debate about what it means to be a fan, with both sides bringing out the worst of each other. Yet Star Trek has always been about the fostering of diversity, both of identities and of opinion. Creating conversations out of differing points of view to make something more meaningful out of the discussion is exactly what the bright future that Gene Roddenberry envisioned has always been about. For too long, there's been this battle between two sides yelling toxic fandoms or SJWs at each other. While there are certain lines in this conversation that are unacceptable when crossed, there is a chance for the rest of us to actually have meaningful interactions. But we need to call out those unacceptable viewpoints. I may be being too idealistic, but being idealistic is what Trek has always been about. I think it's time for Trek fans to lead the way in figuring out how to come together and find a way to work together to make a brighter future as geeks, Trek fans, and human beings. Thanks so much for watching my video. What do you think about Discovery? I would love to see your comments below, but please, no gatekeeping or pushing down others' opinions. Let's foster a positive environment. And if you like this video and want to watch other Star Trek related videos, consider checking out my channel. I do reviews of every Discovery episode right after it comes out, as well as regular video essays like this one on Trek and other fandoms like Doctor Who, DC Comics, and more. Additionally, I'm a member of the queer and specifically transgender community, and I create vlogs and essays working to educate about transgender topics, as well as nerd issues from a queer perspective. If any of that sounds appealing to you, I would greatly appreciate you subscribing to my channel. Until my next video, live long and prosper.